Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick and welcome to the next unboxing. Today's unboxing is on something called Ivermectin. This is from Wauconda Pharmacy in Wauconda, Illinois. Now these are capsules and that's how they look. That's 5 different capsules, all for 1 day of dosing for Ivermectin. So if you read the FLCCC, specifically for my patient, so you can call for prices at Wauconda, but you have to have a doctor prescribe. And if you're in Illinois, they can ship it out to you. I think the prices that they charge are reasonable, plus the quality is excellent. I've always used them for compounding hormones and other things, topicals, because the compounding is where you actually make the cream and the medicine together versus prepackaged, like what you find at Walgreens or CVS. They have a little bit more of a knack as far as personalizing medicine. And this here is Amex Pharmacy. This is another pharmacy in case you're watching this from outside Illinois. Yeah, Melbourne, Florida, right there. So it comes in a box package. This came by regular mail, so with a couple days. That's the difference. If you're one of my patients in Illinois, you might want to have Terry and Wauconda Pharmacy as your go-to because it's local. Because again, it takes more time to get to you. If you're sick and you're calling for a dose and you're going to wait 5 days for delivery, which is fine. Well, it's not fine. The longer you wait, the less the effectiveness of your medicine. If you're outside of Illinois, then you have no choice because I don't think Terry can ship outside the state. This is how the Amex Pharmacy stuff looks. UV-proof bag, and that's their package. This is how their container looks. So this is a little different. This is called a troche. It's not a capsule. Let me open this up. Troche is melt in the mouth that you put under the tongue. That's how it looks. You pop, this is 5 different days. You pop both of these and put them under your tongue. And they too are a compounding pharmacy in Melbourne, Florida. I've done videos on compounding pharmacies, so I'll put a link down below. And compounding pharmacies, again, are pharmacists that are licensed in the state or in several states, in the case of Amex. And they blend up personalized formulas of precise amounts of different components into capsules, topicals, troches. And nowadays with Ivermectin, I used to be able to call it into CVS, Mariano's, and Walgreens. But there was a massive campaign that occurred about a week to 2 weeks ago where bad-mouthing the medicine as a horse pill, or just touting it as a horse pill. And no question, it's given to more humans than horses. So any animal, human, horse, dog, cat, pig, originally given the Nobel Peace Prize for killing different parasites. It has a intricate mechanism of action, but it happens to kill different parasites, and it works so well, and it's difficult to become resistant to, like some antibiotics. Well, when COVID first started, people were dying in several countries, and the spike was occurring. You'd see death and people in big trailers like in Italy or in New York, China. Doctors on the front line were desperate to try to get some traction to stop or slow down the deaths. And what usually happens in that scenario, like a wartime mass shooting, they'll do whatever they can to save lives. And I think that with the advent of the internet, what was happening was doctors over here were talking to doctors in Italy, especially when New York started to get surges. They would communicate and share data or share anecdote, whether it was rolling patients over to have them survive, and believe it or not, that was found to be efficient. In New York, you had teams, since they closed the hospital down, where they just took patients that were lying on with ventilators down in their chests, and they'd roll them for a few minutes, and that seemed to help with the oxygen saturation. But they'd have to have people do that. And when you have multiple people in an ICU and then makeshift ICUs that needed attention, you'd have to have an entire wandering team continue to roll people. And it was surgeons, anesthesiologists, anybody that wasn't working had to create a team. And that was a great coordination. But bottom line is that you had people in the UK talking to different doctors throughout the US, specifically FLCCC. The idea was that these guys were starting to amass successes. They weren't 100% efficacy successes, but they were still successes, and they were sharing their data. So they started to accumulate a database of successes, and that's how they came up with the vitamin protocol. That's how they came up with ivermectin, fluvoxamine. It wasn't just the US. Several different countries were all sharing data, which is spectacular to say that doctors came elbow to elbow to try to figure this thing out. It's also good that the science guys came in and developed mRNA, adenovirus, and other things, and the vaccines. And not that I'm for or against vaccines, I don't want to take that stance, but I had the infection and I did get the vaccination. I got Pfizer ×2. I am here to just tell you the information. Now, while we're talking about it, don't take this as medical advice. Please take this to your doctor. In fact, you can't just get ivermectin, and you shouldn't be taking ivermectin if it's pet grade. You really have to be getting it from a pharmacy. So don't take any chances. Then you'll hear people, the ICUs were overrun. There's a post on social media from a doctor from New York, and it was retracted because it was found to be a lie. He was saying they were getting overrun with side effects from ivermectin and people getting overdosed. And that's why it seems to be like there's a campaign or an embargo to stop good information from coming out. I'm not sure, that's politicization. I don't want to really mention that. I just want to give you guys an idea about what options you have. And again, I think ivermectin is a great option, but the problem is local pharmacies in Illinois don't carry it anymore. I did find one pharmacy, Walgreens, that got it again because they ran out. But when I called back, they had said, "What is this for? And why is the dose so high?" And I knew where it was going. And when I explained to them, they said, "No, we're not going to fill that," and they hung up on me. So it might be coming out, but Walgreens, at least the one I called, is taking the stance that they're not going to fill it for off-label use, and it is my right as a physician to use medicines off-label. We do that all the time, whether it's for psychiatry drugs, heart drugs, pain drugs, even weight loss drugs. There's Saxenda, which is a diabetes medicine, but now it's been approved because it was pushed so hard and used so often for appetite suppression that it has been adopted by the FDA. So that's how drugs work, is if you have it used enough, especially if it's still in patent, the company will spend the extra money to research off-label using to make it declared as indicated for. And when it's indicated for, then more doctors will prescribe it more willingly. When a medicine like ivermectin has gone off patent because it's been out there for like 20 years, nobody's going to invest in more data because they don't get the money back. Because an average randomized controlled trial will be millions of dollars. You're going to hear a lot of information that there is no cure or no treatment, no therapy. The only therapy that we have is actually vaccine, but that's not really therapy. That's population level prevention. If you get everybody vaccinated like smallpox, if you take care of vaccinating everybody at the same time, the virus doesn't have any place to spread or incubate. And if it doesn't, then eventually it extinguishes itself, because that's the way viruses work. They try to propagate themselves using the human mechanism of replication, and they spread to the next human. Well, if you have all humans vaccinated, so there's antibodies in each human that stop the propagation, you stop the virus in its tracks, and it can't go on to variants, it can't develop and evolve. That's a problem, because the US, which is one of the most wealthy countries in the world, what's our vaccination rate? Maybe 50 to 60%, in addition to all those of us who got infected already, so that's pretty decent. However, you'll still have a pocket of humans that haven't been vaccinated for fine reasons. And I support my anti-vax patients. I also support my vaccine patients. So I have all walks of life, and it is my job as a physician or a healer to be neutral, but to give the best suggestions and medical advice, lifestyle change to everybody that seeks me out to make the lifestyle changes, no matter if it's small changes because they don't know how to lift or exercise or eat, or if they're massive changes as far as cancer, rheumatologic disorder, Lyme disease. When disease is severe, it makes it a little bit more difficult, but there's always possibilities if we just take our time. Since September 3rd of 2020, I left the Advocate Hospital system, and I haven't looked back since, and I'm glad I did. The vaccine-centric idea in the United States, it does hold some weight. I mean, although I don't like just understanding or reading the data from a pharmaceutical that sells the product, I think there's ultimately going to be some bias in that. But in a time of a pandemic, I think it's fair, because the death rate, especially November, December, January, February, March of last year, people were dying. New York was, remember there were caskets and trailers that were holding dead bodies. Iowa is on its way there now in the US, so here we are almost a year later and we still haven't got our act together. And that's the complexity of peoples in the United States. But if we can't even get our act together, and we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world with the most vaccines, that means there's going to be people that are unvaccinated or have not been exposed to this novel virus, because you don't have natural immunity. If you're healthy, that's, God bless you. But if you're healthy and you're thinking you're going to use your immunity to fight a novel virus, which you haven't been exposed to in the past, that you're taking a chance. So if you're unhealthy, or you have more than 1, 2, 3 comorbid conditions, meaning high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, just obesity, then, and you don't even have to have full-blown diseases. You just have to have the disease. Even if it's controlled with medicine, that still puts you at risk. And if you have comorbid conditions, you might not fare well if you get infected. Again, as tough as I went through the infection in November. Thank God I got through it in 4 days, but I don't know that everybody can get through it in 4 days. I have one of my packages on Herbal 411 to offer to patients, new patients and old, is a COVID 3-month package where I just follow and try to reverse the diseases and the symptoms that these people have over the course of 3 months. And part of that protocol includes the vitamins, building up immunity again, fixing the gut again, slowly getting back to exercise or activities, and using ivermectin. You see that it's touted as being a horse pill. And no question, I'm going to explain to you why I would say it's not really a horse pill. And on the same lines, it is used in veterinary medicine, but so is penicillin, so is prednisone, so is enalapril, so is metoprolol. So there's a lot of anti-inflammatories, there's a lot of antibiotics, there's a lot of heart medicines, blood pressure medicines that go between humans and vets all the time. So we share that stuff. And ivermectin happens to be used also in animals, but it is also used in humans. It has been used in humans. This is the information from the NIH saying that the statement is they don't support the use of any medicines that haven't been studied. Because of the truncated time for studying and going through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 as usual, you can probably find efficacy. And back then when Tony Fauci first announced that these vaccines had an efficacy of 94, 95, 96%, that was great. But the efficacy, meaning that its success rate, was based on the fact that it decreased the severity of the disease. So if you had the vaccine and then you consequently got infected, you wouldn't have such a severe infection. So that was good from November 2020, December, January, February, March. That was good. There was really a huge surge in infections and deaths, especially in New York, if you remember, but we're not out of it yet. Ivermectin has great data that shows it's helpful. But the thing is, ivermectin is a drug that has been around for 20 years being used. Robust information on the use and the safety of ivermectin in humans, in kids. Everybody else can have it, and we're still using it because in certain parts of the world, mostly the impoverished parts of the world, you'll have parasites. And parasites are probably the number one cause of death in underdeveloped countries. The only thing that we have in the United States for fighting COVID is a vaccine-centric idea. And that would be more prevention. A sizable amount of the population that doesn't want to get vaccinated. And unfortunately, the data is showing that that is where the virus is replicating, in people that aren't vaccinated. And most of the infections now in the hospital are with unvaccinated people. Even if you don't trust the Pfizer information or the Moderna information, and I think that the data says that ivermectin is a treatment. The vaccination, Pfizer, Moderna, or J&J, that's not actually a treatment. So if you get infected, you can't get a vaccine and reverse your disease. You have to hopefully get to a hospital that will support you if you have comorbid conditions and say lung disease and you're going downhill because the infection is rapidly increasing. We have hospital systems that are awesome. The intensivists that run the ICUs are fantastic. In fact, the intensivists that run the ICUs, most of them had actually worked together, especially when Italy was getting their surge, and they came up with ideas. And this is one of the groups, FLCCC, flccc.net, and it's frontline critical care. And most of these doctors are ICU doctors. If you get some very good brains together and experience, and you share that data, you can move forward and apply novel ideas repetitively working without going through a randomized controlled trial. It's several $1 million in several years. We don't have time for that. So sometimes we have to go by anecdote or observational studies or case studies even. Those are cheap and don't need as much money. They sometimes aren't peer reviewed. So there's something called a hierarchy of evidence that doctors or scientists follow. When you can take your time, we follow the algorithm of which one is the more valuable and work our way down. Unless the risk to benefit ratio is easy. I mean, if it's a boo-boo or a hangnail, I don't need $1 million study to say I just put antibiotics on it and it'll work, or I'll cut it and it'll do fine. But if it's HIV, if it's psoriatic arthritis, if it's a novel infection, I think that it would be nice to have randomized controlled trials, double-blinded information, meta-analyses, peer-reviewed data, but we don't have time. People are dying now. The vaccines, just if you take the 30,000-foot view, the timeline is evident, and that's the observational part. The timeline of what happened in November, December, January, February in 2020 to 2021, and then suddenly it flattened and went down. It correlated with the release of the vaccines. So if you got infected and you weren't that severe, you didn't go to the hospital. And if you didn't go to the hospital, then the hospital's not overwhelmed. If the hospital's not overwhelmed, the ICUs will take their time and take care of you properly. They can ventilate you for a short time, wait for your immune system to get stronger, take you off the vent, and then put you to a step-down unit in time. But if everybody in the town is going to the one hospital and there's only like 10 ICU beds, they're going to have to do what Idaho is doing now. They'll have to partition their care. If there's a decision between delivering a baby, taking care of a guy's cancer, and taking care of a COVID patient, and the COVID patient's like 80, I hate to say it, but I'd opt to deliver the baby. And now that's all a case-by-case basis. That's where Idaho is now. Keep the ICUs open. That way when people get sick, the intensive guys, the pulmonary guys, the hospitals, the ICUs can take care of them properly. At this point, and I think it's worth it for those of you who have several comorbid conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, or you're just overweight, that's a comorbid condition. The data, again, not US data, but the data from Israel, says that there are worse symptoms just by having the infection. Most of it is heart failure, lung failure, blood clots. In fact, the proportion of blood clots are higher in people who have the infection than people who get the vaccine. The proportion of people who have the blood clots and all those symptoms I just mentioned are higher after getting infected than people who have the shot or the vaccine and might have a blood clot or myocarditis. We're all going to be exposed to it. So the question is, do you want to get exposed a little bit with the vaccine, or do you want to just wait and get your natural immunity taken care of? And it's up to you. But if you have comorbid conditions and you get natural immunity and don't get the vaccine, you better be careful because you can succumb. Or you can have long hauler syndrome. I'm busy with people who are having symptoms, whether it's brain, whether it's the difficulty with smelling, or whether it's fatigue. They can't exercise anymore because they just crash and it seems like their diseases come out again. It could certainly be Epstein-Barr virus or CMV, not just COVID. Bruce Patterson came up with ideas as far as why people get sick like that and fatigued out again, but I'll get to that. There have been announcements. Friends of mine got this. I got this from a friend, and this is essentially a note saying you're talking bad about vaccines or prescribing weird stuff like ivermectin, that you can lose your job if you're working for us don't talk this crap. And the only way a doctor can save face and maybe entertain sending patients to use ivermectin or fluvoxamine is if you're in part of the trial. And there are some trials that are out there for novel medicines, new medicines, repurposed medicines, and some of them are already finished. Some are still ongoing, recruiting patients from doctors. Usually, if you can find ivermectin in pill form, you get it in 3 milligram pills. Sometimes you'll find some places around the world, usually India. Places that I called up were based, it said Canadian pharmacy, but when I called the number, it was actually India. And it comes out from India, so it takes quite a long time to get from India to here. So if you're calling at the last minute because you got exposed and you're not going to be able to start your ivermectin for 5 days, you might want to have a supply around. A couple of places in Florida, also very pricey. There's one place in Illinois that they were also very pricey. Let's go through the data now from the World Health Organization and the NIH and the CDC or the FDA that ivermectin should not be used until it is fully vetted, meaning that the research is out. I do think the vaccines are fair. They seem to fizzle out real fast. There's other vaccines from outside the US that seem to be good. The other ones that are coming up, we'll have to see. Will they all get emergency authorization? Maybe, unless ivermectin is proven to be a true therapeutic, which I think it has, because when you have a therapeutic, you can't declare emergency authorization. The data is there that ivermectin, and it has been used for worms in humans in developing countries for about 20 years now, and very successfully. And let me show you. So this is just saying that even the dosing here is already, it's been there already. Not necessarily for COVID, but for infection, parasites. The description is there for dosing, specific dosing for parasites. And that's good. That means that the drug is probably safe. If they already have a good dose for how to treat filariasis or onchocerciasis, then you have data that had to go through the ringer, get peer-reviewed and proven. And so the argument that you'll hear is that there hasn't been any data on ivermectin in humans. And I beg to differ. I found this online, and you had to do some research. And this is 32 randomized controlled trials. There are 45 peer-reviewed. There's 64 altogether. And I actually downloaded the entire print-up. And the only problem is that it's not peer-reviewed yet. So for something to be solid in the medical community, it has to be peer-reviewed. I mean, there's great data from all these. These are meta-analyses. And if you're not sure what a meta-analysis is one of the, in that hierarchy of information that we follow as doctors, one of the top is going to be a meta-analysis, like a Cochrane review. And that's when somebody looks at all the publications in the last 10 to 20 years, that they pick a timeline, they do a search on a certain topic with the specific names and the intention set out before, and you accumulate studies that have been done before, and you say positive or negative, and there's 64 meta-analyses. So that means there's 64 times that different organizations scoured the internet to get evaluations and studies together and say and conclude, are these reasonable studies? Were they robust? Were they reproducible? Then they said, okay, let's see if it was a positive or negative for the use of ivermectin. 64 meta-analyses, safety especially. So that's unrefutable. You can argue that maybe the studies were underpowered. Maybe they were, but 64 when there's not supposed to be anything except for veterinary medicine. To me, it's suspect that top-down organizations are saying it's bad, bad, bad. It's only for horses, when it's still being used, and it's also being supported by the World Health Organization in humans. I took it right off of their website. This is the World Health Organization, 2015 October, showing 139. I couldn't read my handwriting, and that's where the paragraph. 139 million people already received ivermectin in the world. That's not now. That's over the course since 2015. And the data was before 2015. So study or same declaration, ivermectin is decades old. So it's nothing it's not new. It has been used for humans. the safety is there. 0.2 to 0.6 dosing guidelines are fair. And again, a lot of the studies that have been done in the last couple decades on ivermectin for parasites do the same dose. And obviously not for COVID, because COVID-19 wasn't available back then. But this is also, and we're talking about safety. This is again from the World Health Organization, 2016. Safety with filariasis. That's a little parasite that looks like a worm, and it causes massive swelling of extremities. Elephantitis, it's called. Talking about filariasis, using 2 medicines. One of them was ivermectin. The study suggestions for ivermectin, and you guys can look this up too. Even talking about the dosing, and I just highlighted it so I could see it because I'm not using my glasses because I'm vain. Since the year 2000. 6.2 billion treatments of ivermectin have gone out to humans, not horses. That's from the World Health Organization. Doesn't make sense. So this is also the insert for ivermectin as far as its mechanism of action. So it has been studied, and this was put out in 2019. And this one said, here's a dosing for strongyloides right there. And that's essentially 15 milligrams in a single dose. And again, if you give it for strongyloides stercoralis, it's a nasty one. I studied that in the Philippines when I was in medical school. But regardless, it can kill people because it affects the GI tract, and it invades other organs, and it gives you diarrhea and a couple other things. So you will succumb to it if you don't get treated. And this is a great treatment for strongyloides at 15 milligrams total, single dose, 1 day. So when I was first prescribing ivermectin, I would give about 12 milligrams for people. It comes out to about 0.2 milligrams per kilogram. People did fine. I was always worried in the beginning about having headaches, nausea, vomiting, GI upset. Those are some of the side effects. But the folks that I used it on didn't really have any side effects. And the small symptoms like brain fog, anxiety, anosmia, taste, they're gone. They got better. The question, though, is if you use ivermectin for parasites, can you use it for COVID without that much data? And that's called off-label use. We have a lot of off-label uses just because the risk to benefit ratio is fair for the patient with very little risk. So we just throw medicines that are different. Baclofen for pain is one. There are other medicines in rheumatology, definitely cancer medicines. There's off-label use for many different medicines. And this is also from the World Health Organization with regards to safety and off-label use. This one in particular, it has not been approved by the FDA for malaria. So ivermectin has not been approved for malaria, but some ingenious places where there's high malarial states, Africa, South America, they're trying it for malaria. That's called off-label use. And it's robust. The information, the data that they're gathering up is saying that it's useful for malaria too. It stops the cycling of malaria in people that get exposed to the mosquito. So that's off-label use. Do you have to have a meta-analysis or a randomized controlled trial that costs millions of dollars to give it to somebody with malaria? No, because it's off-label use at 0.2 milligrams per kilogram. So again, they're using it for malaria, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram, just like I'm using it for some of my preventive COVID patients. In the World Health Organization data, the dosage, it states that 2.7 billion tablets have been given, and that's the phase 1 part of the trial where they were using a dosing of 2,000 micrograms per kilo. That comes out to 2 milligrams per kilogram, which is very high dose. Again, we go with 0.2 to 0.6. They were just testing out how patients would do with high dose. That's 2 milligrams per kilogram. That's a lot. So the higher you go with your milligram dose, the higher you're going to have some side effects. Nausea, vomiting, headache. That's with massive dosing. 0.2 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram is not massive. Some people would think, oh, 0.6 milligrams is a lot. That comes out to about 30 milligrams to 32 milligrams per day, depending on your body weight. This is the FLCCC. So I talked about this with my last video. Check out FLCCC. I said FLCCC.com. It's actually FLCCC.net. Here we talk about chronic prevention, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram dosed with a meal. And the drug handout that I showed earlier said it should be taken on an empty stomach with a lot of water. So there's a little bit of a difference there. I think the ICU doctors found that people do better with less side effects if you take it with a meal. Post-prophylaxis, you can go with 0.4 milligrams per kilogram, the different protocols that the FLCCC has. So check out the flccc.net. They have videos, they have a wealth of information, including where Pierre Corey presented to Senate. These guys aren't just fly-by-night doctors. They're ICU doctors in the United States. What I do for my long haulers is I follow their symptoms. I try to look for deficiencies. I try to investigate whether they have comorbid. Sometimes with COVID exposure, the immune system will be shocked, and an old Epstein-Barr virus or an old cytomegalovirus, EBV or CMV, that can get turned on, and that'll give you that chronic fatigue issue too. So a lot of the chronic fatigue that you see that cycles with the long haulers, it almost resembles fibromyalgia or Lyme disease that I take care of. Bruce Patterson put together this. It wasn't peer-reviewed, but it was published in Frontiers in Immunology. He's a total geek with regards to data and using computers to analyze data and come up with algorithms. Really cool geek, doctor, physician. He came up with the mechanism of action of COVID and why long haulers get that cycling on and off of fatigue. They try to exercise and they go back downhill again. You don't have to read the whole thing, but theoretically it's from the monocytes that hold the spike protein. Because the spike protein will be gone. The virus will be gone and out of most of my patients, but monocytes will circulate and be in the bloodstream and hunting for bad guys for a long time, about 90 to 120 days. And sometimes those monocytes have little spike proteins. They don't cause the problem, but they can cause a reaction. When they demarginate, get into organs and start hunting again and get turned on, they can cause the same symptoms of COVID, an acute infection. So that's what we have to watch out for. And Patterson and his team came up with great algorithms for finding who's bad, who has to be watched, who you don't push with exercise, and a couple other things. So, and they call it post-acute sequela of COVID, PASC. So that's the new label. That's the more scientific title than long hauler syndrome. This is actually from the NIH because they've also poo-pooed ivermectin, which I think is a great therapeutic. So the bottom line is that the vaccines are preventative. If the entire population of the world gets them, it will not do anything for acute infection. And thus far, we don't really have anything for acute infection except for ivermectin. Maybe fluvoxamine and maybe some vitamins. I mean, you have remdesivir and steroids and a couple other things, but the data on remdesivir is, I mean, for $3,000 a pop, I don't think it's that great. I think ivermectin's better. And that's, how much is ivermectin? $50 for 5 days, $10 a day, $10 a pop. And when it's compounded, you have to pay extra. Some of my patients got bulk tablets out of India. I question where they come from and the quality. A couple of them that I've already seen their packages, fair, and the FLCCC puts on their website different pharmaceuticals from around the US where you can get ivermectin in case you don't have somebody like me around. Companies are not going to carry it anymore, I think because they're also being influenced from the top down to not carry it or question doctors that order it. This is the NIH saying that in April of 2021, there is a study or a trial. It's called Active-6. It stands for Accelerated COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines. Interventions and Vaccines, 6. It's a trial which is really cool, declared by the NIH. But when I saw it, I thought, okay, maybe NIH is doing a good thing. And then I looked at the people that are involved. Active-6 is being funded. $155 million is being given by NIH. And then there's other companies from the private sector that are also donating. And look at the companies that are donating. These are all pharmaceuticals. It's good that there's an Active-6 trial going on. And they're essentially going to study ivermectin and fluvoxamine and a couple other things. Ivermectin has lost its patent. It was owned by Merck for a long time, and then it ran out of its patent. And when you run out of a patent, anybody, any country can get the formula and produce it. So it goes super cheap, especially from India. Pennies to the dollar. Mark my words, there's going to be a drug that is fast-tracked, probably from one of these companies, to be therapeutic for the treatment of COVID, not just for the vaccine part of trying to squash its vectors. you have to find a doctor that will prescribe it with the pharmacy. So your doctor has to call it into the pharmacy, and the pharmacy will send it to you because they have rights in the state of Illinois and other states too to send it to you. Stay safe. Please consider getting the vaccine. I think that there's always going to be questions as far as the side effects of the vaccine and how it was rushed, but you can't ignore the timeline. Again, the timeline said that during that surge that we had, it flattened and it went down. And the only other thing that happened during that time, that the vaccine release had coincided with the peaking and the flattening. So it must have some kind of good use. As far as whether it will keep you permanently antibody heavy, probably not. The president of Pfizer said he believes that everybody should get a third vaccine or booster. From their data, okay. I mean, maybe they are nice and they're philanthropic and they're going to give us all the vaccine for free and keep it for free, give it to the world for free. I would rather have somebody else say that you need a third booster shot, not the person that owns the company. But if you're anti-vax, see my previous video, check out the flccc.net website for what you should be doing. And mostly, whether you're anti-vax or vaccine, please follow the rules. And most importantly, exercise, reverse your comorbid conditions, and get super healthy. I don't care what age you're at. So you should be exercising, you should be sleeping deep, you should be having happiness. That's the idea of Herbal 411 is I'd like to have my patients live in a non-medicinal kind of way, maybe with vitamins, supplements, and nutrition. But if we can't, we might have to get you on some medicines for a short amount of time, help you get through the lifestyle change, and then get you off those same medicines. So it's always going to come back to living as naturally and healthy as you can to as long as you can. So stay healthy. I'll see you at the next video.